Ladies and gentlemen, it is with pleasure that we introduce today's MC and moderator, the President and CEO of the American Public Human Services Association, Tracy Waring Evans.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the APHSA Leadership Corner. It's great to see folks from around the country. It's fun to watch people filling in the poll. We're pleased to kick off this new series designed to spark inspiration and innovation. And I can think of no better inaugural speaker than Nancy Koehn, who I'll introduce shortly, whose writings and teachings are truly meant for this moment in our nation's history. First, I'd like to share a few words about the Leadership Corner. This ongoing series is a brand new event here at APHSA. Our goal is to provide you with passionate speakers, timely content, and we hope some lively discussions that speak to our current times, whether that's today's session, looking at our courageous leaders in times of crisis, or the session that will follow next month, followed on racial healing and equity. We are keenly aware that the contributions each of you are making in your own organizations daily, and how important it is to connect with others navigating the same challenges that we're all going through right now. We know it's these type of conversations with inspiring leaders that guide us, that can help fuel our fire and help us continue to work to a better tomorrow for all. We hope this series fuels you and your team, sparking the innovation and inspiration we all need. Before I turn to Nancy, I'd like to thank the APHSA strategic partners for their underwriting of this series. We are truly fortunate to have the support of many industry leaders who are working alongside public agencies to help achieve our shared vision for thriving communities built on human potential. And we're particularly appreciative of the work these companies are doing alongside many of you to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to make sure also that everybody remembers to put your questions in the Q&A pod throughout the session. And we hope that if you're on social media, you can tweet about us on the APHSA Leadership Corner, hashtag APHSA Leadership Corner, and include the handles at Nancy Koehn, and at APHSA1. Following Nancy's presentation, we will have a conversation and be able to answer questions. We're leaving plenty of time for that. It's my honor now to introduce our speaker. Nancy F. Koehn is a historian at the Harvard Business School, where she holds the James E. Robinson Chair of Business Administration. Koehn's research focuses on leadership in crisis and how leaders and their teams rise to the demands of high-stakes situations. Her recent book, Forged in Crisis: The Power of Courageous Leadership in Turbulent Times, spotlights how 5 of history's greatest leaders successfully navigated crises and what we can each learn from their experience. She's authored 6 additional books on leadership, is a contributor to 3 other literary publications, and a frequent contributor on PBS NewsHour, as well as several national news programs on television, radio, and in print. I've had the privilege of hearing Nancy speak on more than one occasion, and I've become an avid follower of Nancy on Twitter. Suffice it to say, I was hooked from the minute I was introduced to her work, and I encourage anyone who has not read her materials to do so. Many of Nancy's insights into courageous leaders are in full view as we collectively navigate the COVID-19 global pandemic and its economic repercussions. I promised her I wouldn't steal her thunder, but what I do want to share is that all of you joining us today are the very leaders we need in this turbulent time. And at APHSA, we are deeply appreciative of not only what it is you do every day on behalf of the people of your state and your community, but also how you do it. With that, I'll turn it over to Nancy for Leading Courageously in Crisis, Rules of the Road.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's a huge honor to be here, real pleasure as well. As Tracy said, I'm a historian. My PhD was in 18th century European history. So from the time I came to the Harvard Business School almost 28 years ago, I've been something of an odd duck in that I study history and I teach it and I use it and I love it. And I teach at one of the most pragmatic institutions, most present-minded institutions in the world, the Harvard Business School. And the point of all that is that I have grown into my historian stripes, if you will, grown into my work and craft, which I love very dearly as a historian. at a place where we're encouraged to use everything that we do in terms of our research and offer it to leaders today so they can use it immediately in practice. So I've grown up looking at the big picture, trying to understand how rhymes of the past fit with currents and issues and crises and challenges and opportunities of the present, and bring them to people like you so you can use them to get even better. So that's really what I do, and I love it. And I study leaders. I have been doing this for a long time now. Study leaders past and present, but I study a leader in a particular situation. I study leaders in crisis. And I don't study leaders in surgical strike crises or natural disaster crises, in which there's a terrible event and all kinds of problems and great volatility. And then the question is recovering and moving on. I study leaders in crisis in long-term, slow burn turbulence. So the Civil War, or Winston Churchill and Britain in 1939 and 1940. That's or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a resistor in Nazi Germany, or the COVID pandemic, the economic dislocation, the incredible suffering and vulnerability of so many people during this crisis, and then fueled by, but much bigger than the COVID pandemic, the campaign for equality and justice and its extraordinarily important resurgence and redefinition in our time. These are the crises that I work with. So having said all that, I never expected to be a historian in a moment like this. So let me start with a few appetizers. Then what I'm going to do, my friends, you leaders, what I'm going to do is present a series, not a huge number, but a series of tools and insights that I have been privileged to learn about by virtue of studying leaders who rose to the occasion, raised their game where they needed to in a crisis. I'm going to present those to you. You'll decide for yourself which of those have relevance, which of those make sense to you, which of those you want to pick up tomorrow and use. If you're not already using them, I will validate them for you if you are. And then we're going to talk about anything you want to talk about. My job is to be here as a resource, an enabler, a blower of wind behind your wings. So we'll leave plenty of time for discussion and questions and answers. Let me start, before we get to, as I said, several, it's about 6 or 7 rules of the road. Let me start with 3 observations from someone who's paid to see the big picture. The first is that this moment, the COVID pandemic, its global scope, and the turbulence that it's begetting or enabling or intensifying in its wake, that this turbulence this moment is a seismic event. This is not comparable to Hurricane Katrina or Sandy or many of the crises that we've seen in this country, in America, in the last 10 or 15 years. This is something much bigger. And it is on par, if you want to talk about magnitude and consequence, it's on par with a world war. The First World War, the Second World War, perhaps, but I think this is even bigger than the pandemic that the Spanish flu created in the second decade of the 20th century, 1918, 1919. This is, I think, even bigger than that. And the reason I say that is several, if you will, because of several factors. First, it's global. Secondly, it's completely interdependent. As Andrew Cuomo, a leader who I think has really risen into his kind of best self in this crisis, as he says so often, right? Wherever there is COVID and there are people, means an epidemic there is an epidemic everywhere, because there's so much interdependence in terms of the spread of the virus and in terms of our lives and our very well-being in this moment. So it's global, it's completely interdependent, and it's reshaping our world as it unfolds. So I think the talk that we hear so much of about let's get back to normal, or let's get to a new normal, or how soon, like look at our watches, how soon is this going to happen? I think that's very badly misplaced. It's understandable, it's human nature to want to get beyond and go back to something that was pre-crisis, but that's not possible here. Just like it wouldn't have been possible to say, I want the world to be like it was in 1939 if you were living in Poland in the fall of 1939. I want it to be like it was in January. That wasn't possible. It wasn't possible in America to say, I want the world to be like it was in 1938 once we were in 1943. What we're working our way toward every day, and this is relevant for your organizations and you as leaders, is What's the post-COVID world going to look like? So because we're remaking the world, not just where we work and how we work, not just how we connect with people in a socially distant, masked environment. We're remaking, right, how we think about equality, how we think about who's essential and who are the people doing some of the most important work in our society. And let me tell you, we're not talking about bankers in large, powerful, rich New York institutions when I say that. Those people are important. But arguably, lots of grocery store clerks are every bit, if not more important. So it's remaking our ideas about our very health system in this country and access to that health system. It's remaking our ideas about leadership. So we are working our way towards not a new normal, but a post-COVID world. And what's at stake is no less than what was at stake in any global conflict, and that's life, death, and our very essential welfare and well-being. So first big picture observation, seismic event. Second big picture observation. I learned in April, at the beginning of starting to talk to different groups about crisis leadership, I learned that the word apocalypse in Greek means revelation. And I thought that was fascinating because in many ways, and you've heard lots of people talk about this, you've undoubtedly thought this yourself, there's a lot being revealed that wasn't so clear before COVID in the pandemic itself. We're learning about our leaders. We're learning about what our values truly are. We're learning about which companies, right, live by values of decency and dignity and which do not. Just witness who took PPP money, a payroll protection program money, and for what purposes, and who did not. So we're learning a great deal. A lot is being revealed as the shades come up and the curtains open in this pandemic. So revelation is an important piece of this. And that means that real leaders, I'll define that in a minute, real leaders, right, are being suddenly known for who they are and what they do and being valued truly in a new, powerful, poignant way for their worth. So as we think about how we're showing up for work and who we're going to put our trust in and who we're going to invest in and what we're going to invest in, remember that we now live in a new kind of glass house where a lot more is visible and where your worth and your dignity and your important missions will be newly appreciated as we work our way through toward the post-COVID world. Last observation. The reason I study leaders in long, slow burn crisis, personal and professional, is because what I learned early on in my historical research on different people, beginning with an explorer, an Antarctic explorer named Ernest Shackleton, who I began studying in 2001, what I learned early on was that in crisis, leaders have a chance to get massively, rapidly better. And great crisis leaders, real leaders, do that. Why does it happen in crisis and not so rapidly, not so significantly, not so lastingly in more calm or stable times? I don't have a perfect answer to this, but I can give you a good metaphor for it. And it comes from Abraham Lincoln and a speech he gave in the middle of the Civil War in 1862, when the Union fortunes, the government attempt to keep the nation together, was not going very well. And this is in the wake of Lincoln's promulgating the Emancipation Proclamation to end slavery. And he said basically, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves from older ways of thinking, and then we can save our country. And I think that is in essence what happens with real leaders during crises. And by the way, leaders go one of two ways, and we know this from watching our set of American governors, right? Leaders in crisis either rise dramatically, rise to the challenge, raise their game, or they shrivel and they hunker down and they try to satisfice according to short-term measures, and things get worse and they get worse. So what Lincoln is saying is that because the old ways of doing business don't work so well, because the stability that we counted on to use these kind of modus operandi are no longer so valid, we have to make things up. We have to raise our game. We have to set a new sight for ourselves and figure out how to get it done and get through the crisis and preserve what's so valued in the crisis, in this case, life, our lives and our well-being. And in that crucible of the crisis, individual leaders, think of Andrew Cuomo, think of Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, think of Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, a host of Governor Hogan in Maryland, a host of individuals that are like, I got to do it. I got to figure out how to get this done and get us through this crisis and get stronger and better in the process. And first, I have to do that within myself. And as soon as I can do that within myself, begin to do that, I can bring other people with me, and we can start to really get through this crisis as strongly, as resiliently, as courageously as possible. So I study leaders in crisis because that's when leaders have this amazing, painful, scary, right, exhausting opportunity to get a lot better. For the American abolitionists, and how each of them rose extraordinarily in moral seriousness, in courage, in determination during the crisis of the Civil War. So the third point is crucibles. Crises are crucibles in which you, as good as you are now, are going to get even better, and hence my rules of the road. Last thing I want to offer, and then I will turn to these rules of the road. Many years ago, I stumbled on this definition of great leadership. Real leaders, courageous leaders. And it came not from a military general and not from a CEO and not from a president and not from a great medical expert. It came from an American writer, mostly a fiction writer named David Foster Wallace. And in an essay he wrote, nonfiction, about John McCain's first presidential campaign in 2000. And he's on the bus with the reporters, and they're following McCain around the southern part of the United States. And Wallace, in this article for Rolling Stone, ends up in this long riff on leadership. And here's what he comes to about the kind of pinnacle of his thinking in his writing. He says, real leaders are individuals who help us overcome the limitations of our own weaknesses, laziness, selfishness, and fears, and get us to do harder, better things than we can get ourselves to do on our own. Real leaders are individuals who help us break through the boundaries of weakness, selfishness, laziness, fears, and get us to do harder, better things than we can get ourselves to do on our own. I think it's a really powerful definition. I discovered it in 2005, and I have never let go of it because I think it's so useful, and it is so important in COVID, right? Because what COVID requires from the citizen standpoint, right, from all kinds of leaders, is individuals that can help us rise up above our selfishness, above our short-termism, above our factionalized and, childlike politics, and do harder, better things than we can get ourselves to do on our own, so we can control the spread and protect lives and livelihoods. So with those as, if you will, prologue, let me offer a series here, and I'll give you some historical and present day examples of these rules of the road. Let me offer these to you. Again, what flashes for you, what means something to you, is completely up to you. The first, and these are in no order of importance. They are listed in, perhaps with the exception of the last one. They're just listed here. So the first one I want to offer you is that real leaders, courageous leaders, leaders who rise to the challenge in themselves and then with the people they lead, and therefore with their organizations and in society, are individuals who quickly themselves and then with their teams get comfortable with all the uncertainty, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Get comfortable with the uncertainty, get comfortable with the volatility, get comfortable with the fact that right now we have no end zone in sight for COVID in the United States. It's been so badly handled in so many ways, not completely, but it's at a large level so badly handled. And we as citizens have not uniformly done our homework and done our jobs. And so every month, the end zone gets farther away and vanishes into mists that we can't see. So we get comfortable with all of that. Doesn't mean we don't keep trying to do the right thing and do our jobs and lead our organizations and lead ourselves. But we get comfortable with uncertainty, we get comfortable with the volatility, and we get comfortable with navigating point to point, right? We're going to head this way right now in this particular organization because that looks like the winds are slower and the waves are lower over there. But we're ready if we need to tack in a different direction if the storms come up over there. We're always heading for the North Star. The mission of our organization, of our people, remains as important, if not more important, than it was before COVID. But how we achieve it has to have a lot more flexibility, a lot more imagination, a lot more willingness, as Lincoln said, to think anew and act anew and navigate point to point and be ready to pivot and tack in a different direction as we need to. And in each of those moments, right, heading this way, tacking, changing directions and heading a different way, at each of those moments, we are learning forward. We're learning in a new way because we're not so bound by a set of procedures and operations and systems that we could rely on in stable times. And we have to do a lot more innovation and imagination. And we can therefore learn, think about the post-COVID world, make bets now on that world, and learn as we go. So rule number one, get comfortable navigating point to point, get comfortable with the discomfort of all that change and that, that end zone in the unseeable or unrealized mist, and learn forward, pivoting as you need with lots of imagination and innovation. And this is true in big, kind of large levels of your organization, and it's true in small levels. And the sooner your teams can really get down with this, the more anchored and grounded they will be and the more focused they will be. I'll come back to focus in a few minutes. So rule number one, navigating point to point. Rule number two, your mission. Why do we exist and where are we headed? Right? What's the North Star we are steering our ship to? That mission is actually a lot more important. Why? Because first of all, because of the field that you're in, it's an incredibly worthy and socially valued mission. And we need those things when life and death and well-being is at risk for so many people, for all of us at some very real level, for so many people. We need those missions even more than we did in last December. Secondly, your mission is a ballast. May not seem like it, but it is. It's a ballast in stormy waters and high winds and lots of reduced visibility. It's a ballast. It can motivate your team. It can motivate you. It can motivate people around you that look to your organization for critical services, critical inspiration, critical resources. So your mission, actually, saying it, talking about it, pointing toward it, right, anchoring yourself to it is incredibly important. Do not in any way, shape, or form get more than a few inches away from that mission. And when you have nothing else to say at the end of a long, exhausting day filled with dealing with small crises and putting out fires, say the mission out loud and say it to a few of your team members. It is incredibly important, and it is more inspirational now than it was a year ago. Third rule of the road. It is extremely important, and this is a little bit more theoretical than the first two, right? Cling fast to the mission, navigate point to point, learn forward, be ready to pivot with improvisation and imagination. Rule number three, how you frame the crisis as you as a leader is incredibly important. Now, how do I explain that and make it really tactile? Because it is. When you're talking to your people, getting on a webinar and waiting for it to start with your team, when you're holding a town hall, when you're having a telephone conversation with a team member who has a family member that's ill, when you are speaking to all the people that take their cues from you, your ability to frame this crisis is one of the most powerful assets you have to help your people get focused, grounded, ready to do their job, to fight the fear that can be paralyzing, right, or destabilizing, and it's a way to get them ready to break through the boundaries of laziness, selfishness, weakness, and fears. So what do I mean by framing? I mean, here's where we are. Here are the challenges we're facing today and tomorrow and as best we can see over the next 3 to 6 months. Here's what we're doing about those challenges. And we are going to get through them based on these resources. I'm going to say something more about this in a minute when we talk about communication. And based on our track record and based on our people, because your people are always your most important resource. So how you frame the crisis, right, is incredibly important. I keep thinking about Lincoln. What over and over during the Civil War, especially as he grew more and more confident of thinking about the Civil War, not as a war to save the Union, but as a war to end slavery and restore the promise of America. That was part of his rising as president during the Civil War. over and over during the Civil War, he chose lots of opportunities to frame the crisis for the American people. What's at stake? What are the things we bring to bear, right? From the soldiers at Gettysburg, right, to the better angels of our nature, to the terrible suffering of the Civil War, and how we would redeem the promise of America as a result of that suffering by ending slavery. He chose every opportunity he could to frame the crisis, its importance, its challenges, its stakes, and the resources of the people that were being called on in this case, both cases, today and in the Civil War, the American people, right, to deal with the challenges and to fight for the worthy mission. So how you frame it, right? It's not just a medical crisis. Right? It's not just an issue of wearing a mask as critical or being socially distanced, as important as those actions are, and they're very important. It's that to your people in the context of the work you're doing is incredibly important. Okay, that's rule number 3. Rule number 4, let's go pour into communication. Again, I'm going to stop in a few minutes and leave us time for questions. But rule number 4, one of your most important tools in navigating the crisis, helping your teams do that, building your organization, even as it weathers the high winds and the gales of the pandemic, one of your most important tools is communication. And I know that sounds cliche, so let me put some meat on those bones so it doesn't feel quite so obvious and uninteresting. What I mean when I say one of your most important tools is communication, I mean your ability to keep addressing your teams and your organization on a very regular basis. I feel like watching the rhythms of COVID and the assorted crises. I feel like we're in a August, kind of the dog days of August, in which COVID exhaustion has set in, even in cities where there are very, very high case counts and positivity rates. That's going to change now as schools try to go back to session. We're seeing the results of some of that at the college level. So many schools having trouble and having to go to remote learning. But that intensity level of exhaustion and uncertainty about what's next is going to give way now in the early fall to, I think, a new intensity, regardless of the large energy level, the zeitgeist, if you will. It's incumbent on you as a leader to keep on communicating regularly with as large and relevant a group, subset, or the entire organization as you deem necessary, and to do a couple of things in that communication. So why do I say that? Why do you need to communicate more? You're doing lots of it. You're probably spending most of your time doing this. I'm suggesting something a little more formal, a little more regular on the same channel. If it's a webinar, if it's a phone, a video, or a conference call, if it's a kind of video, FaceTime, regardless of the way you're doing it, you stick with the medium and you make it very regular. Once a week, certainly if things intensify, more than once a week. But again, something that people can then put in their diaries and expect that at a given time, on a given day, they're going to see you talking about the organization, its mission, its people, its challenges, its resources. And the reason that regularity, think about FDR and his fireside chats, think about Winston Churchill and his addresses to Parliament and his radio addresses to the people of Britain in some of the most perilous times any country has known in modern history during 1940 and 1941, when Britain stood alone, the only bulwark between a Nazi-controlled Europe and the possibility of a very different kind of world once the Nazis were defeated. All of these leaders, and many more, Nelson Mandela, when he first became president of the Republic of South Africa, Katharine Graham during the Watergate crisis, when the newspaper was under all kinds of threats, and so was democracy. Right? All of these leaders understood that the more volatile the circumstances, the more people need to hear from their leader. They need to hear from their leader. They need to hear from their leader real time. And they need that to stay grounded, to stay focused, to prevent the fear from being paralyzing, and to have a sense of what's next and what they're called to do. Because we forget and we get anxious and we're not sure and we don't always see the leadership we need on higher levels. So we look to people just like you in our workplaces in which we're invested to help us be grounded, to help us understand our work, and to help us understand what's going to come next for ourselves and our families. and our teams. Now, your communication isn't just a set of thoughts or ideas or a to-do list. As important as those things are coming from you, competent, highly effective leaders, your to-do list wants to always have these two parts to it, almost like a balance sheet, right? Where you have assets on one side, liabilities on the other side. And those two parts are these: brutal honesty and credible hope. So on the liability side, the brutal honesty, you're going to tell your people exactly what you know in terms of what's happening with the organization. How serious is this? What are we really trying to do in terms of climbing big mountains that we have to climb? And what's the next round of challenges coming at us tomorrow, next week look like? So brutal honesty. People have very good antennae for the facts, despite the power of disinformation, despite the power of a lot of absolutely irresponsible behavior on social media. Most people, 75% of people, have a very good antenna for the truth. So they need brutal honesty because their antennae are super highly sensitive in a crisis. They are thirsty for every drop of real leadership and information from real leaders that they can get. So you want brutal honesty. Again, think of Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, I study leaders. This guy was not on my radar screen last year, but I watched almost every single one of his 143 consecutive news conferences or press briefings every morning, mostly at 11:30. And I watched him rise like this and then like that and become a very different kind of person in front of his people and the reporters. A combination of last night, there were 3,000 cases of COVID in the state of New York. We are almost out of ventilators. We have called for them from all kinds of sources. Our hospital beds are full, right? Brutal honesty. And then credible hope. What's credible hope? Credible hope is what we bring to bear on the difficulties of brutal honesty. What are the assets that offset the liabilities? We have an extraordinary team of courageous healthcare leaders. We have an extraordinary group of essential workers, from bus drivers to grocery store clerks to pharmacists to EMT workers to janitors. And that New York tough, he likes to end every press conference with what he calls New York tough. New York tough is New York tough. It's smart, it's disciplined, and it's loving. So he over and over and over, as he rose, New Yorkers rose to the challenge. There's a very important correlation between Andrew Cuomo's leadership and the fact that New York, the epicenter of the crises for 2 months, with more deaths and more hospitalizations than I guess California's just surpassed it, than almost any state in the union, now has positivity rates day over day that are less than 1% for over 20 days. There's a correlation between the leader and the results. And Cuomo got better and better and better at talking to people about credible hope. Or think about, again, Winston Churchill. This is from a speech in May of 1940. The news from France is very bad. This is right before the evacuation at Dunkirk. And yet in the next part of the speech, he's going to talk about British determination. We will never surrender. We will fight on the beaches. We will fight in the streets. We will fight with pitchfork. Both essential and really important. So, fourth rule of the road: regular, predictable, same channel, right? Communication that is the essence of brutal honesty and credible hope. The fifth rule of the road. I've got two more I want to talk to you about. This is a question. How are you showing up before your people? How are you showing up? Now, I know that sounds like a hackneyed question or a silly question, but I actually mean something quite significant given my research. So it turns out that individuals and groups take their cues from their leaders, not just from what they say, but from almost everything else about the leader. So what their energy is, how they're carrying, even on a webcam, their shoulders, what the intonations and cadence of their voice is, where their eye contact is, what kind of state of mind are they portraying right? State of mind, state of emotions are they portraying as they speak to you? People are taking their cues from all kinds of unspoken, unwritten sources. So are your children, by the way. So is everyone that looks to you, many more people than you realize that think of you as a leader and want to know what you know so they can figure out how they should respond and what they should do. So this how you show up, from how you walk into the kitchen where your kids are eating breakfast right at the island, and what do you look like, and what's your, what kind of aura and energy do you have, to what's your voice when you pick up the phone to call a team member? What's the tone of your voice? To, are you looking at your phone when the webcam starts capturing you on the Zoom meeting? People are making notes of all those things. And they are incredibly, right? They are incredibly influenced by small things. What you may not even think of as small things, but literally, right, where your shoulders are. And the best example I can give of this, to make it clear to you, and there's lots of good evidence about this with athletics. So there are sports psychologists and performance coaches who study this, right? Study the body language of athletes changing courts on a tennis game, or walking out onto the court after they've been called into a basketball game, and study how their language is related to their performance. And there's an unequivocal, strong correlation between people who walk and act and portray the energy of I'm going to do this, right? With God as my witness, I'm going to get this done, and people who are, more diffident, even mostly unconsciously, more diffident or more retired, or somehow portraying the anxiety they feel in the way they show up. So the best example I can give is this explorer who I've studied a lot, a guy named Ernest Shackleton, whose 27-man expedition, he was the 28th. Their ship got locked in 2 icebergs off the coast of Antarctica in 1915, and the ship was just carried into the currents of the South Atlantic for about 9 months, and then the ship was crushed by the ice and went down. And the men had abandoned ship and were living in tents with a few lifeboats, but living on a floating iceberg. And they would, by the way, continue this for a lot longer. It's an extraordinary survival story. But every single day when Shackleton walked out of his tent, right, and we know from his diaries that he was nervous at times and anxious and uncertain, and he walked out with his shoulders square, right, and he'd be like, lads, gather round, time for breakfast. Let's get ready in case we're ready to go home. So his ability to portray the courage and confidence, right, to his men that they needed to break through fear and weaknesses and laziness and selfishness was absolutely essential to the survival of those 28 men. They did survive against every odd you can possibly conceive of. Talk about the impossible being made possible. But in any event, how you show up is very, very, very important. And if you don't show up with any kind of thought to yourself about it, if you're not intentional about this, I guarantee your employees, your team members, the people, your kids, will look at you and interpret your energy, your body language, your carriage, your presence negatively. All ambiguous behavior by leaders, there's great evidence on this, is interpreted negatively. So rule number 5, show up in service to courage, resilience, determination. Last rule of the road, and then we can open it up for questions and comments. Do you remember back in the days, it seems like a lifetime ago to me, that we were traveling by air, and you'd be taxiing out to the runway, and the flight attendant would say, in the event of a loss of cabin pressure, right, an oxygen mask will drop from the ceiling, right? Place the mask over your head, put the rubber band or the elastic behind your head, and then, and only then, right, adjust or help someone next to you with their mask. So put your mask on first before you adjust or help others with their masks. That is rule number 6, and this is the most important rule. You, as a leader in a long, slow burn marathon where we can't see the finish line, and we're going to come to the finish line in a different world than we began the race, right? You're feeding and watering and self-care is the most important rule of the road. Because how can you summon up the energy to show up with determination and resilience and courage and inspiration if you're exhausted, if you're frightened, if you're so inundated with, what our devices throw at us all the time, every second of every day and through the night, that you've lost your train of thought. So your commitment to feeding and watering yourself, I want to talk about how I see that commitment now, is absolutely ground zero here. And especially in a crisis of this kind of magnitude, because it's so important, it's so long term, and because the world we're going to move into when we finally stop thinking about the COVID world is going to be a world that's going to be significantly different. So feeding, watering, elements. Eat right as best you can. Eat healthy foods. Eat them in the right quantities. Right. Keep yourself fueled as cleanly as you can, because that will help you physically and it will help you emotionally, psychologically. Secondly, you got to get a lot of sleep. You got to have enough sleep. What's that mean? Well, I was on the board of Tempur-Pedic Mattress for 11 years, so I know a lot about American sleep habits. Most Americans get lousy sleep at least 4 nights a week. Leaders need to get decent sleep 5 nights a week. So you need 6 hours. You need them most nights. And whatever that means for you, how you get that, whatever the tools of the trade and tricks that you have to get in bed and rest and relax, you must do that, because sleep is so incredibly important, not just to you, but to all the people that are depending on you, many of whom you don't even know about. So you got to feed yourself well. You got to sleep. You got to move. You don't have to take up a gym routine because you're living at home. You don't have to let go of that burden, but you need to walk. You need to move your body over and over during the day. Steve Jobs, Charles Darwin, Frederick Law Olmsted, the famous landscape architect who helped design Central Park, and many other very, very powerful public spaces, important public spaces in the United States. All these people and many more, Lincoln, they walked. They would get up from their desk, get up from his Cupertino office, Steve Jobs, get up from his writing desk, Charles Darwin, and take a walk for the purpose of doing 2 things. One, clearing the mind. There's something, put your phone down, don't take your phone with you, or your PDA, right? Take a walk and see how your mind starts clearing out, right? All these different conflicting lights and bells and video game signals that are going off begin as you walk to start to recede. And at the same time, things you've been toying with, thinking about, churning over, knotted up over, if you're willing to walk 20 minutes or so, can begin to unknot, unravel, and solutions can begin to emerge. Not because you're saying, hey, I want to solve this problem, I'm going for a walk, because that's what walking does. The combination of the physical, mental, and emotional is incredibly powerful for grounding you, focusing you on seemingly unsolvable problems, and releasing all the unimportant, right, even though it's urgent, stuff that's clogging up the pipes. So take a walk. I recommend leaders take a couple of 20-minute walks every day. Even if you just walk up and down your driveway for 20 minutes, doesn't matter where. You need to walk. Mobility is really important. So that's the third part. Fourth part, I just alluded to, you need a few device-free moments, and not just in the shower and not just when you're eating. You need to put your device away for a couple of 20-minute periods, particularly before you go to bed. There's lots of good correlation on this and sleep. You don't sleep well if you're on your device right before you try to sleep. You need a few moments. I say again, 2 20-minute intervals. If you need to do that when you walk, fine. Put your device away and take a 20-minute walk. You get, it's 2 the price of 1. You'll see real results in terms of your ability to get things done, and in your own sense of resilience and possibility for getting through this effectively. So device-free moments. And then 2, maybe 3 other quick things to say here, and I'll close on this last rule of the road: taking care of yourself, feeding and watering yourself. The world right now of our 24/7 media is full of worst-case scenarios. I'm talking about mostly the apocalyptic folks who are all around in different shapes and sizes, and certainly all over social media. And there's some of that in the mainstream press and mainstream media too. Let me just strongly tell you and strongly suggest that you take a page from every great crisis leader I've ever studied, and that's a fair number now. All of them found the self-discipline By the way, almost everything I'm talking about now is rooted in some form of self-discipline. All great leaders learn the power of self-discipline, right? They lead themselves before they can lead others effectively. And they grow as leaders because they grow in leading themselves. All great crisis leaders find the self-discipline to turn away from the worst case scenarios. So they peer in the room, that room of in their mind, right? That room in their mind. They go, oh, what if this happened? And they go, what are the probabilities of that? What am I doing to protect my organization from that? And then they close the door, and they're done with that, because the odds of that happening are so much lower than all the stuff in the center of the probability distribution that they need to deal with. So you find the self-discipline to turn yourself and your kids and your partner and your family's eyes away from the worst case scenarios, and you concentrate on navigating through what's likely to happen, none of which is necessarily easy. I'm not suggesting that you're suddenly turning away from hard to easy, but on what's much more likely. So the focus on the apocalypse is very detrimental, the obsession with the apocalypse. Two other quick things. You're going to need recovery. And I don't mean, the walk, that's useful, but some of that's part of your work. And I don't mean your device-free moments. Those aren't recovery. They're useful because they're calming your brain and decreasing your chance of Alzheimer's and focusing you. But I mean real recovery. Activities, moments, whatever they are. Lincoln liked to go to the theater, and then he liked to have people to the White House and tell really raunchy stories. I mean, he told really dirty, really, let's say in poor taste stories. He loved doing that. That took him away from the pressures and the relentlessness of being at the center of the Civil War. Winston Churchill liked having friends over and smoking cigars and drinking brandy and quoting Shakespeare. Ernest Shackleton liked to play the banjo that they salvaged from the ship late at night. Catherine Graham and Melinda Gates had real rituals with their children that had nothing to do with leading their organizations. Whatever it is, go out and stand on the driveway and watch your daughter on her tricycle. Pick up your Fender Stratocaster and pretend you're Eric Clapton. Watch, Harrison Ford movies. That's what I'm doing. Whatever it is, you need moments completely away from the pressures of your leadership and all the responsibility that you have in these roles. So you need recovery every day. It's really important to the feeding and watering. And last but not least is we're going to need to access those resilience muscles. This COVID pandemic will ultimately be an exercise in resilience and endurance. And those resilience muscles are really essential. So resilience is a muscle. It's not a genetic code. You're not born with it or not. We all have it. You have to find it and then hone it and then strengthen it so you can use it with more effectiveness each time you want to give up, or your people want to give up, or the difficulties just seem too great to face right now. So resilience is really important. And that means, and this is the end of my comments here, that means realizing that we can get stronger in a crisis, that it's not personal. This isn't happening to us or because we are us. It's not personal. And it's not going to determine the rest of our life, right? So people who are resilient see the crisis in those ways. We're going to get through it. It's going to end. It is not personal. It's not a judgment from God on us. And we're going to get stronger as we get in getting through it. And it's not going to affect in some hugely negative, unchangeable way the rest of our lives, versus people who see it as personal. Who can't see an end, who can't believe there's an end, can't have the faith that there's an end, and believe that the rest of their life are determined by this. Those people shrink and wither. Resilient people, including the small number of people that get massively better in a crisis, can see the crisis in those first set of attributes. So hone that resilience muscle, strengthen it, help your people do the same. They need it. We need it. Let me pause there. And we'll open it up to comments from your good selves. Questions, comments, any way I can be helpful, I want to be.
So I think we have some good questions coming through. Can you hear me, Nancy? There we are.
I certainly can, Trace. Certainly can, Tracy.
Wonderful. So let me offer just a couple of reflections, and then there's some great questions that have come through the Q&A pod. Your conversation really about your first point around leaning into the ambiguity and understanding that's what we're navigating. It really has struck me how much folks who work in the field of human services, which is highly complex system, often comes with a great deal of ambiguity and uncertainty, has really positioned leaders on the ground to be able to lean into this moment in ways that I think often some industries don't have. And so I think it's interesting because we often talk about the complexities of the systems and how frustrating it can be to have ups and downs. And in this sense, I've heard from a lot of leaders who've said, yet in this moment, I feel as if I've been able to understand that all of my prep, all of my building resiliency and muscle has come actually in the very industry in which we practice, which I think is an interesting observation and one that gives me hope, right, for leaders who are on the ground really doing great work. But let me turn to some of the questions that came up and see what your thoughts are on them. One question was, as a leader, should you admit how you're feeling during the crisis, which of course can ebb and flow, I think, especially when you have high anxiety? What are your thoughts around that?
It's a great question. I would say what I said. In response to the rule of the road about showing up in service to your mission, you have to be very careful about where you express your more negative emotions, or the emotion of fear or doubt or great uncertainty about your ability or your team's ability. You have to be careful about that, right? People are looking to you because they believe you help them do harder, better things they can do on their own. If you say to a group of your team what Shackleton certainly wanted to say but found the self-discipline not to, which is, oh my God, I have no idea how we're going to get through this, or Frederick Douglass saying in 1958, slavery is just getting more powerful. I can't believe it. I just want to give up this fight for abolition. Right? The leader doesn't always have the luxury of being able to express their own moments of their own questions in the same way a team member or an employee or an ordinary citizen does. That being said, you have them because you're a human being and they're very important. So what I like to say to leaders is find the trustworthy places, the context, the people, your first mate or your trusted colleague, where you can release what you need to release and look at it. You need that. Lincoln used to talk to his secretaries, these two men that were these young folks from Illinois that came with him, and he would say, I have no idea how we can win this war. Why can't this get easier? But he never let congressmen, reporters, soldiers, generals, ordinary Americans, his fellow citizens see that doubt, because as he said, if I went out on the street expressing what I felt, the war would be over and the South would win. So you have to be very careful about choosing where and how you do that. Last point. It is, you do have the luxury with your deftness and your thoughtfulness and your intentionality of saying to people, I don't have all the answers, but I do have the confidence that we will find them as we need them. Tracy just said in one of the most heartening conversations any CEO has said to me in the 100 webinars I've done in the last 4 or 5 months. She said, look, our people are, because of the nature of our work, are wired are used to a volatility. Well, God bless you folks, because that's so important. So that you can say, I don't have all the answers right now, but I know that we will find them as we need them because we're navigating point to point. That's a very powerful way of humanizing yourself with your team, of expressing the ambiguity of the room, but of framing it so that it's like, with God as our witness, we're getting through this the right way, even if we can't see it in a GPS-like, kind of set of directions. So that's a long-winded answer to an important question.
Yeah, that's great, Nancy. Another question that came up, which I think is just so relevant to the time we're in, including the setting that you and I are on with all of the callers here in virtual world, about do you have tips about how to actually portray in positive body language when you're just a virtual head on a screen? How do you convey some of those pieces that you talked about that really show that command and that assurance for your teams and for the people that we are serving?
It's a great question, and I think I think the whole topic of how do we show up in front of a camera with a big monitor or a computer is a very important one. But let me take the question more directly and then say something quickly to this larger issue of showing up, since we're going to be in business like this for some time, and maybe in some ways for going forward. So I think the most important aspect of how you show up in front of a camera is actually your energy. Now, I'm taking great care here to put my shoulders back. I'm a little round-shouldered. I'm taking great care to hold my neck up, right? I'm taking as much care as I possibly can. My camera's located above my monitor to look up, even though I want to look into the screen, especially when Tracy's talking, right? So those are easy things, right? You're going to kind of carry yourself as if you were a ballet dancer or a horseback rider or a basketball player reaching up, right? It's all about upward thrust with your body, shoulders back, tightening your core, lifting your ribs, and just reminding yourself during a webcam to do that. That's incredibly powerful. So first is that body posture, presence, carriage. Secondly, but more important, is the energy. So Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, all these platforms, they all suck energy out of the room. They just suck it, right? This is one of the things we're all battling. How do you inject humanity? How do you inject energy into the virtual meeting room? And that, a lot of it comes from your ability to keep your voice, the cadence of your voice, the passion, summoning up the passion to really, right, can be bigger than life on the camera. So as passionate as you've been in your offices or in meeting rooms or before an assembled group of people in a conference, in an auditorium in your office, you actually want to crank up the voltage a little on this, because the medium is taking it away. So more energy rather than less, whatever it is that you need to do before you get on camera to inject that. But you're feeling like I'm too energetic, I'm too caffeinated here, so to speak, in terms of your energy, is actually probably about the right place on in the virtual world in terms of other people picking up from you and taking in what you're saying with impact and power. A couple of other small things. You want good lighting. So nothing takes away from a person's kind of presence and power and confidence as being seen in shadow. You really do want, this is a biblical issue, but I'm talking about a technical issue. There's a reason for the biblical references to light. You really do want to be standing in the light. So whatever that means in your setup, light is very, very, very important. Non-glare glasses are useful if you need reading glasses, as I do. But all those things are important. And then last but not least is the kind of humanity. So lots of us aren't so comfortable in front of a camera as we are in person, but being able to inject humanity into these virtual podiums that we're all using is so important for the leader. And that's part of showing up in service to your mission. So whatever that constitutes for you and your people, is that talking about your child, or talking about a funny thing your dog did, or saying, I know Carla's having a birthday today, and I just want to call out and say, may this be a great birthday for you. Whatever it is, injecting that automatically grabs people's interest, tells them you're not just focused on how scary or unstable the situation is, and helps them absorb you. Because what we're really trying to have them do is absorb more of you so they can do harder, better things than they can get themselves to do on their own.
Thanks, Nancy. I really appreciate that. How about this question? How can we stay the course when there's no clear end? And this person actually put examples like no war to end, no rescue, right? If you're thinking about a disaster situation, how can we communicate progress? How do we keep that momentum going?
It's great, another great question. Nothing but A+ questions here. So let me start with Churchill, who I actually haven't written a great deal about, but who just is so relevant in so many ways in terms of some of the things he learned. And this was his moment, by the way, folks. Winston Churchill before World War II and Winston Churchill after World War II was not a leader anyone was interested in. But he said at the end of 1942, when the North Africa campaign had turned in Britain's favor, he said, "This is not the ending. It is not even the beginning of the end. It is perhaps the end of the beginning." And I think that kind of sums it up. So he couldn't see in 1942 that there was going to be any end to World War II. I mean, the Nazis were fully ascendant in 1942, and through 1943, it would take D-Day to break the back of the Triple Axis, of then Nazi Germany and Italy and Spain. So we're not the first, even though this crisis feels like a first in many ways. So first thing is to say what Churchill did, which is, I figure we're about at the end of the beginning. To be a chronologer, to be the chronicler, we're not near the end. To say the obvious, but to say it, you're saying it has great power. We can't see the end, but that doesn't mean we don't give up the fight. Here are some of the things that will help us get to the end, right? Public responsibility for citizen behavior. Thinking about what's really at stake, so we're not trading off gym visits and bar trips for our kids' chance at an in-school education, right? What we need to do as we move indoors in the winter season in lots of parts of this country. So these are the things we need to do. These are important, even though we don't know exactly when we'll be out of this situation. But so you're a chronicler of the situation. You're a timekeeper. You're telling, we're in about chapter 4. It looks like a chapter 10 story, so we're going to keep going. But as important to that, so you're being real, that's brutal honesty, is marking how well you've done in chapters 1, 2, and 3. So here's what we did here's where we were in chapter 1. Here's where we are in chapter 3. Here are some of the things, and you're going to do this on a regular basis, not every week, but every month and a half at least, probably every month. Here we are. Here's what the latest sense of when we may, start to move out of all this uncertainty and stress. I feel like I have to start doing a webinar now and helping people deal with stress, because the stress is so heavy here with COVID in so many ways for all of us. I now think leaders have to start thinking about how to relieve stress among their people. But in any event, you're going to tell them, you're going to mark the achievements and how far we've come. That is perhaps the most important thing you can do. Because as difficult as this is, as exhausting and depleting and frightening as this is, right? Crises are situations full of uncertainty embedded in great stress and fear. As much as this crisis is all of those things, lots and lots of smart organizations have accomplished a great deal and learned even more. So your ability to mark that for your people every month is going to help them enormously, right? Get through into the still unseeable mists of the end, or the beginnings of the end of this pandemic and all that it has wrought. So that is the most important, I think, about the single most important thing you do. And keep calling attention to all the reasons we have for credible hope, right? The road is long, but whatever it takes, we are going to see the end of this.
Thank you. So taking it back to the kind of the personal upkeep, right, for ourselves as leaders, do you have suggestions on how to draw boundaries when, I will just say, many of these human service leaders, right, the demand on them right now is as high as it's ever been in their careers, right? So suggestions for how you have so much to do. A lot of that requires outreach to other partners. Yeah. How do you think about setting some boundaries for yourself?
Yeah, so all of you, I'm so glad you said that, Tracy. All of you are servant leaders, right? You're the quintessential definition of great servant leaders. But that means you folks need to care for yourself even more assiduously, even more diligently. So a couple of thoughts on that that I've seen work in practice, because I do this work with executives. Now I do it virtually, but I do it with a lot of different folks. I do it with doctors who are terrible at taking care of their own well-being in general. And they're facing some of the same pressures you folks are facing in terms of call outbox, emotional, physical, practical, professional outbox, never ending. So one thing I would say is choose a moment in your week when you're not going to do any work. You have to do that. I don't mean when you're not going to take a Zoom call or you're not going to, have a meeting. I mean, times when you say, I'm giving over this half day. Half day is a good chunk. I'm giving over this half day and I'm not going to do work. And I'm not going to check my phone, or I'm not going to check my professional email. And I'm just going to give myself that day. You probably need to check your phone because most people are addicted. Most Americans of all ages are addicted. So that's why I'm not running a recovery program in that sense of breaking an addiction. Although I think we'd all be better off if we're less addicted. But in any event, you're going to take a block of time. Half day is a good amount. You're just not going to work. Whatever you're going to do, weed your garden, call your mom, reach out to an old friend, do some virtual shopping, take a walk, play with your kid. Whatever it is, you're going to take a bike ride. Whatever it is, you're not going to work. You need a block of time like that. I think you need a couple during the week. And I don't know, a lot of folks, work, do their most intense work on the weekdays and then take their weekends. But what I'm noticing in so many people I talk to is they're now realizing that the recovery on the weekends, which is never going to be a recovery like it would be in a more stable time. There's too much anxiety. There's too much other stuff going on. We are just operating in an environment layered with stress, embedded in fear. But I notice more and more people saying, I just need the weekend, and just saying at Friday at 4:00, I'm finished. And these are people that are, like you folks, high achieving, highly controlling, highly successful people, type A's. And they can't keep going if they don't really block out some time. So long-winded way, block some time when you're not going to do your job. And you need, and some of that time can't be, I'm going to throw myself into the home renovation project. There needs to be time when that's empty as well. That's the first thing. Second thing, consider taking a day like Friday or half day. Half days are often more workable than a full day, when you don't do meetings, right? You're going to catch up with people. You're going to have a block on your Outlook calendar that has nothing on it after 2:00 or 1:00. I found this to be with lots of different kinds of high achieving people to be very, very effective. And I know all kinds of leaders, right? From Leonard Lauder at Estee Lauder, who ran that cosmetics company for a long time, to A.G. Lafley at Procter & Gamble, to many, many healthcare leaders who in the afternoons on Fridays or sometimes even on Mondays just say, this is open time for me to do my job in a more free-form way. That is incredibly helpful to kind of building your resilience, refueling you. Even though you're working, you're not working in the same kind of way when you're not scheduled. That's been very effective. And I would say that's important. Better. Last but not least, you have to choose. And this, again, self-discipline is all based on self-discipline. I think we should start teaching self-discipline in our schools now, so we have a generation of young people growing up in a way that our society isn't enabling and empowering with the ability to lead ourselves. But I think you need to put boundaries on your time at home. So I don't, for example, after 9:00, look at my phone. It's very hard because I'm highly neurotic and I'm highly controlling. And I'm just dying to know what's going on X, Y, or Z. But I have now taken to turning my phone off at 9:00 and only using my computer or my iPad to watch movies. Right recently, I've been watching the Democratic National Convention, but turning off email, closing out email and social media. So I think those boundaries at home are really, really important. It doesn't need to be 6:00 to like 10, 9 the next morning. You can make it 10 at night to whatever you need, but you need some fences around your work because we're working in our home. So there's fewer boundaries than we used to have with our work. So you got to create some, and then you got to have the self-discipline to try living with them. Try it for a few days. If it drives you crazy and you can't do it, you won't keep at it. But if it doesn't drive you crazy and you can keep at it, you'll notice that when you are doing your work, you're more effective, you're more productive, you're more focused, and you feel like you're more present doing it. So you feel stronger and better at your job.
Terrific. I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. I certainly want to give you an opportunity to have a closing comment, Nancy. But
Yeah.
in terms of, this is a really interesting question, in terms of whether your rules of the road apply the same if leading multi-generational workforce.
Oh, I think they apply leading any. I think they apply leading any workforce in any context. These are not rules of the road. I suddenly came upon, with Abraham Lincoln, and these are rules that I've seen over and over and over again with all kinds of with all kinds of leaders. So they absolutely apply. Your young people want your navigating point to point. They want your brutal honesty and your credible hope. So do your older folks. So do your older folks in between. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
And maybe just share with folks as we kind of come to a close here, some of the things you really hope folks will take away from the session today. Obviously, we're going to have you back, an opportunity for a deeper discussion. But, as you think about who these leaders are, what they're navigating in terms of assuring that all people have the services they need in this very difficult time, what are your kind of closing remarks for folks?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Tracy. Again, thank you to you and Donna for allowing me to be here. I've worked with APHSA folks before, and it's such a privilege because you truly are doing the Lord's work, right? You are helping people navigate the very essentials, the building blocks of their lives every day, from their homes and their health care and their children to, where they sit in terms of their ability to navigate the economy, and their families. So literally, you are angels of mercy and goodness. And it's important for you to say that in a time that leaders aren't talking enough about angels and mercy and goodness and dignity and helping everybody, right, acquire and have the respect and decency and dignity and goodness that we're all entitled to, and that we all do better for giving to our fellow creatures and our fellow men and women. So first, you're doing work that could not be more important. Let me say that again. You're doing work that could not be more important. There's no other group I talked to 500 US mayors in April. I've talked to CEOs and CFOs. I talked to 100 safety officers from around the country. I've talked to doctors and internists and emergency room workers. I've talked to all kinds of executives in creative and less creative industries. And I say this with you and the folks who are essential workers, right? You are. So there's no one doing more important work than you. That's the first thing. Second thing, as difficult and fraught this moment is, it's also a moment when the tectonic plates, the pavement of our society is being cracked, and the possibility of building something, a better healthcare system, right? Much more economic justice by breaking down systems of economic and legal injustice in order to acquire social justice. There is no economic social justice without it being built on a bedrock of economic justice. So this is a very, very important moment in America in terms of what might be achieved. So even as this moment is, wreaking havoc with our lives, it is creating opportunities, not only for the pavement of all kinds of systems to be broken up and then reconfigured, built back in a different, more just, more satisfying, right, more resilient way. We're going to be so much more of a resilient society in 25 years than we are now, assuming we can navigate this from the better angels of our nature. But as that is happening, real leaders have a chance to rise to the occasion. And you folks, given the importance of what you do, must do that. And the last thing I would say is that and this is just in a different way, it's a different reformulation of what I've said in these first two observations or benedictions. There will never come a moment in your working life in which your leadership will matter more than it does for the next year, 2, or 3 years. Because the next 1, 2, and 3 years determine the vast future that we're walking into. And not just in this country, all over the world, but America's role is outsized. So what we do, whether we fall lower or whether we rise to what we're meant to be in our promise, right, is in the hands of people like you, moving the boulder of goodness forward. So this is your moment, as hard, exhausting, depleting, anxious as it is. The world needs you to be your best selves more than it has ever needed you. And I believe more than it will need you again. And it's a real pleasure to be having a few moments with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was fantastic. And I think just a great kickoff to this leadership series. Nancy, as I said, will be back for part 2, Leading Courageously in Crisis Rules of the Road, on November 18th. And we look forward to having you join us on September 9th, when Dr. Gail Christopher, who is another one of my favorite people, will have a conversation with us on racial healing and equity. And so be sure to visit our website, leadershipcorner.com, for all the details on our series, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.